Well, today we start with one of my favorite pictures of a cabin on a lake. This is actually in Norway, I'm pretty sure. It's in Norway, and this is a Norwegian's idea of the nicest house ever. You know, on a barren piece of rock with a couple of trees, and you know, and actually it is. It's quite beautiful. So today, what we're going to talk about as we come to Psalm 84 is we're going to talk about what your concept of home is. What your concept of home is, because that's what Psalm 84 is pointing towards, is what is your sense of home? So when I say the word home, what comes into your mind? It could be a whole bunch of things. And so that's what we want to hone in on, because the writer of the Psalm is trying to reorient us into understanding that home may not be exactly what you think it is, but when we actually explore it through the Psalm, we look at the words of this song, I think you'll click with it and go, yeah, I think, yeah, okay, I get that. So it's an issue of home. Here's my first home. Are you ready? Here is my first home that I've ever experienced. Which one am I? Can you tell?
The very first one.
Let's vote. Far left?
Far left.
Middle? Far right?
Far left.
It's the middle one. It's the good-looking one. Come on. Well, the hair and the dimple. The dimple hasn't completely gone away. So I'll tell you, that dimple was deep enough to fall into until I was... There were women that said, hey, so I had to make sure I showed them the non-dimple side. Yeah. Yeah. But this was my first concept of home, because home was where I grew up. You know, I was born in this 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in Hyattsville, Maryland. I was born into that, and I lived there until I was 4. And so it seemed like that's where home was. That's my mom on the far left. My dad's behind the camera, of course, so you can't see him. This is Christmas. The dead giveaway, it's Christmas instead of Thanksgiving. I mean, there's a bird right there, but if you look at these candles on the left, those are actually red candles that have this white, frothy stuff around it. That's supposed to look like snow. If you came from the right decade, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So that was my tip off. This was actually Christmas in 1957. But that's, you know, your concept of home really is where you started from, and you tend to sort of always go back to thinking that when you think of home. But now today, if I went back to those apartments were built post-World War II, these 3-story brick buildings, over a dozen of them, that were built on poor land right next to the big high-tension voltage wires that went into Washington, D.C. And not really prime property, but it was just apartments. It was just apartments, just brick old apartments. If I went there today and I looked at that apartment, I wouldn't stand there and get all gushy inside, really, because they're kind of ugly. They don't look like the Norwegian cabin on the lake. So the sense of home has something more to do with the people than it does the building. And that's kind of where we're going to go to today. That's what he's going to say in Psalm 84. So keep watching for that, because that's where we're going. So here's the deal. See, there I am. That's me right there. So the issue of home in Psalm 84 is going to be sort of enlightening to us. This is a very famous psalm. He starts it off, the emendation, the words at the beginning of the psalm that say what it's about. There we go. To the choir master, according to the Gittith. We've seen Gittith before as an introduction to Psalms, and there is some smidgen of connection to musical instruments when you say Gittith. Almost everyone agrees it's Gittith, and there is some smidgen of connection through Spain that this word actually is the basis for the word guitar. Just saying. So so according to the Gittith, that's actually a musical instrument style. A psalm of the sons of Korah. Korah is a real guy. He was part of the Levites. He was part of this sacred singers group that when you had to have songs at the temple in Israel, you went to the sons of Korah or to some other one. So he's one of them, real person. So, what's that? Oh, Korah is your mom's name? No kidding. Is it spelled like that? Oh, that's close enough. We'll go for that. Oh, that's kind of cool. So this is what they would sing at the temple. So let me get you in a Jewish mindset, an Israeli mindset for a second. When they left Egypt, this is what home looked like for them. Home was a desert with lots of rocks. If you ever go to southern Israel to this very day, down towards the Sinai, it's very inhospitable. And in fact, you think, well, it's just sand dunes. Well, it's sand and rock. Lots of rock and sand and rock. So this was home for the Israelites when they left Egypt, when they were freed from Egypt. This is what it looked like. But in an interesting way, God did not want them to feel like they were homeless while they're in the desert. And so in Exodus 25, the Lord said to Moses, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst." So you see, as they're wandering through the desert, as they're on their way to the promised land, God said, I want them to physically see that I'm with them. And so since every Israelite who's left Egypt is now living in a tent, I want them to understand I'm with them, so build me, God says, a tent. And that's what that was. That's what that sanctuary, it's the word that comes to be used for tabernacle. It's just a tent. And so when they traveled, even though this was not home because there's nothing home-like in the desert, for them, he wanted them to understand that home was where God was dwelling, and God's dwelling in your midst. Now, just not to put too much of a point on it, do you know that when they wandered in the desert and everyone's living in tents, when they would stop overnight, did you know there was actually an orderly way they had to lay out their tents when they camped every night? Do you remember reading this in Exodus? This is cool. God says, I want three tribes to extend to the north. I want 3 tribes to extend to the east. I want 3 tribes to extend to the south and 3 to extend to the west. And in the very center of it is God's tent. Ooh, it's pretty cool. And so there was an orderliness about this move. It wasn't just crazy. And they could look every day and they could see if God's tent was there. And they would know, in a sense, they were home because God was in their midst. So that's an idea we're going to start developing in 84, because that's what we're talking about. Now, later on, the desert was replaced by Jerusalem. And here's Jean-Jacques Tissot's kind of imagination of what the temple looked like from the southeast. And in fact, see this corner of this wall right here? That would be the highest point from the temple area down to the ground. That would be where Jesus was tempted by Satan to throw himself off. It would be off that corner, is what it was. But so this is what it looked like then. And so here's not a bad representation of the temple, but I think there's better ones. But you have to realize the temple was bounded on 4 sides by a wall, and then the city of Jerusalem was built around that. So this is what they would think of when they think of God living in our midst. God lives here. Now, remember, God does not have to live inside a building. In fact, he doesn't have a body. I mean, he's immaterial. He's spirit. In fact, he's everywhere. So God's desire to live amongst Israel was a way to remind Israel that I'm living amongst you. So like the sanctuary in the desert, or the tabernacle in the desert, which was made like a tent. It was a tent. That's what it was. Whoops. We just went crazy. Hello? Did you move something, Scott? I don't know. Am I on still? Okay. So the tent in the desert was a way of reminding Israel that no matter where you go, I'm following with you, and actually you're following me. When you go to Jerusalem, you would remind yourself that God lives in our midst because he has this building. But literally, he doesn't need the building, but it's his reminder for them that I desire to live in your midst. Okay, so that's what he's doing right here. So now we've developed our Israeli mindset. The presence of God, his sanctuary, his house is in our midst. By the way, if you want to see, I forgot to mention it, if you want to see the design of the tabernacle in the desert, go to Exodus 26. Some of you all read this a couple years ago. But there's a whole chapter that tells exactly how you're supposed to build it, what it's supposed to be made of, the entire 9 yards of the entire thing. And then later on, that same general design of the moving tabernacle tent where God lives became the same floor plan as the temple itself. So the tabernacle is really just a moving temple is what it is. In our culture right here, tabernacles and temples have radically different uses and meanings. But in their terms, the tabernacle and the temple both were a physical representation of the invisible God's presence. The tabernacle was a tent version. The temple was a limestone version. That's all it is. Okay, so that's the distinction. Okay, so here we start. Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. How lovely is your dwelling place. Now, the question we're going to have to ask ourselves all the way through this is, what makes the dwelling place lovely? And you probably recall when the apostles were with Jesus near the end of his ministry, they pointed to the temple and said, pretty cool, huh? Right? Look at the stones. And remember what Jesus' response was? Pretty soon, not one stone will be standing on another. So they were very impressed with the building itself. But that's not what the psalmist is going to get at. But what does make it lovely? What makes God's dwelling place lovely? And by the way, I want to emphasize this dwelling place really is the same word you use for resident. It's where he lives. I'm going to point out a few words as we go, just so we can get straight. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. In the Old Testament, when you see the word Lord, it almost always means Jehovah. It's always, well, it does. It depends on the English translation, but that's become kind of a standard for English translators. When you see Jehovah, which actually in Hebrew is pronounced Jehovah instead, Yehovah, then that's what we see. So how lovely is your dwelling place, O Jehovah. That's, by the way, Jehovah emphasizes, when you think about that as a Jew, it emphasizes the covenant relationship between God and his people, the promise. Remember when Moses was out in the desert and the burning bush is flaming? Right? And in the burning bush, he comes, he takes his sandals off, and he has this discussion with God. And God says, I want you to go back to your people who are back in Israel, and you're over here in Midian. I want you to go back. I want you to say some stuff to Pharaoh. We're going to get him out of there because I've seen the trouble they've gone through. Remember all that stuff? Have you read this? Okay. Again, blank stares like, what? Okay. And then one of the things Moses says back to God is, okay, I got some problems with this, but one of my first problems is they're going to ask me what your name is. What's your name? And God had already told him, well, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the God we're talking about. But Moses says, they're going to ask me your name. What's your name? And God responds by saying, I am that I am. He uses the word to be as his name. And that ends up being the foundational root of Jehovah. It just means to be. But this is the contract name between God and his people. This is the God of the promises. So think that when you see that. And also, we've seen this word before, Lord of hosts. Lovely word, Savah. It means many. So anytime a lot of people were collected together, you'd say that's at Savah. That's what that is. One of the most common times people would be gathered together in public would be armies. So many times armies were called Savah because they were collected people. When there was a celebration and all the people around, there were hundreds of thousands of people around for the celebrations, that would be called a Tzavah. Anytime there was lots of people, it was a Tzavah. When you think about the heavenly hosts, that is the innumerable angels in heavenly places, you think of that, that was often called a Tzavah because it's many. But it was used in lots of ways. So we talked about this last time we saw it, that sometimes you can actually put yourself in the Tzavah. And that's not wrong to do because as Israel left Egypt, the people were called a Tzavah. So you can be part of that Tzavah. So when he says Lord of hosts, does he mean just Lord of the heavenly hosts of heaven? Not necessarily. He could be meaning Lord of us, Tzavah, the people who are collected. So that's not a bad interpretation. It's just saying that he's in charge of everybody. He is the Jehovah of all the Tzavah. Okay, so that's how lovely. Why? Well, here he goes on and talks about just how his emotional reaction to seeing the temple. And this may have been the reaction when people came on Palm Sunday when they saw it. They travel and they see it. He says, my soul longs. Yes, it faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God. Now, I think that's kind of an unusual thing. Because when I pulled our car up this morning to come here, I didn't have that emotional reaction when I saw this building. Did anybody? No, because I don't think we're drifting away. It has nothing to do with necessarily the building, but something else much important inside the building we're talking about. So, do I keep cutting out? I don't know why I keep cutting out. Hello? No? There I go. Back again.
There you go.
I don't know. Might be me. Well, let's look at this more closely because this is a fascinating sentence. He says, my soul longs. It means he longs. He's like when he sits and he closes his eyes, he just longs for this dwelling place of God. He thinks about, he fantasizes about is what he's talking about. His soul longs and then faints. Faint is a great translation because that word literally means to be consumed and die, end to end. Psh, done. So when you faint, that's what it means. So he says, my soul desired God so much, and I'm thinking about it, anticipating. I get so excited. I blew a circuit. That's what it literally means. That's how much I love looking forward to God's dwelling place. My soul longs, and I run out of gas and even fall over. I'm so anticipating what it is. For the courts of the Lord, and by the way, the courts are the outer part of the temple as opposed to the inner parts of the temple where only God can be. But that's where God wants us to be, is right there next to him. For the courts of the Lord, again, we've got Jehovah right there. And my heart and flesh sing. My heart is, this lave word really means, heart, but it really stood for the you that we can't see, the invisible, immaterial part of you that's inside. Many times it'd be called your spirit, it'd be called your soul, but it's the you that we know that's different than just the physical you we can touch, the hidden you inside. So many times that's how this word lave for heart goes. So he says, the invisible me was like that, and then my flesh, that's the visible you. This basar is who you are on the outside. You could say from my first home picture, that part of my basar was a really cute little dimple. Right? That would be a basar comment. Well, he's saying, when I long and even faint, I'm looking so forward. When I long for it, I do it with all that I am, the hidden me inside with the hopes and the dreams and the intellect and all that stuff that makes who I am. I do it with all the inside of me and all the outside of me. Inside and out, it's all of me. All of me. And this is why when Jesus said the biggest commandment is to love God with all that you are, all your heart, soul, mind, strength, he's going through the entire thing about your lave and your basar. The in part, the out part, everything. Everything. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God. And this is a different God word over here. It's this word El. It always means strong and mighty. Many times it's written El, but you pronounce it in this case El. And so it emphasizes the power and the might and the strength of God, who he is. So again, the building doesn't seem to be the center of the whole excitement. It's who's there. God is resident here. El. For joy for the living God. Now, one word I didn't point out that changes the entire excitement of this entire verse. And you know what that one word I left out that's so exciting? It's the living God. This is not just the God of the past, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the God who yet still lives. Now that radically changes everything. Radically changes everything. Almost every religion in the world today that's focused around a central figure, like Buddhism or stuff like that, it's always centered around someone who's dead and gone, and just there's nothing going on anymore. It's just tradition, and this guy started it, so we worship him. Muhammad, the same kind of way. Muhammad's not alive today. But when this guy starts dreaming about where God lives, he's dreaming about where the living God is. The living God. I'm not going to get too Hebrew today, but if you've ever been to a Jewish bar mitzvah, if you've ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, and they have a toast or something like that, when they raise their glasses and have a toast, do you remember what they say in Hebrew? L'chaim, l'chaim. That word means to life. L'chaim, to life. This is that word, chaim. It means life. It means life. The living God, this very living, vibrant God. This is what excites him. Not because he's going to a great limestone building that's got a lot of gold in it, but he's going to the residence of the living God. Now that should make your fingertips tingle. And that's what he's getting at right here. This is starting to be what home is all about. And now in the next section, I think he looks up at the physical building. And he looks up, if you've ever seen high buildings and stuff like that, I think as he looks up there, he spots something way up there in the top of the buildings. And what he spots is actually one of these. It's a swallow's nest, right? And swallows. Swallows, they build these little mud nests underneath the eaves of things, right? Well, in mentioning what he comes up next, it's probably very likely that he looked up there and said, look, there's actually birds living in the structure where God lives. And there's theology in this, he's thinking. There's theology in this. And so here's his theology. I don't know why I'm cutting out again. I don't know. Dead, gone. What? Did I what? These are brand new batteries. Oh, well.
Yeah, speak in the microphone, dear.
I'm going to keep teaching. Well, the problem is they can't hear who's watching online right now. You want to switch the camera audio?
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. I'm just dead. So, even the sparrow finds her home. The swallow makes a nest for herself where she may lay her young. At your altars of Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Why don't I use this? Is this on, by the way?
Yeah.
This will help me because I won't have a voice left if I talk this loud.
herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. So what's the theology he sees all of a sudden when he looks up at the eaves underneath this very holy place? It's the residence of God, and he sees sparrows and small birds and swallows who actually they're not just flying around, they've made a home there. Well, theology, remember when Jesus talked about, does God really love you? I mean, does God even notice who you are? And remember the example he gives is, well, what about the sparrow? God sees the sparrow and takes care of him. If he takes care of the sparrow, he'll take care of you. So the sparrow and the swallow, these are insignificant creatures in the kingdom of God. And what he sees in the theology of this is he looks at the building with the residence of God and says, even the most insignificant creatures on earth find blessing living in God's residence. Now see, most places where you have swallows building nests on buildings, usually government buildings and stuff like that, people say, we got to get those off of there. Those mud things and the swallows and look at the droppings on the ground. This is just a really bad deal. It makes the whole place look messy. We got to get rid of this stuff. But evidently, in God's economy, he said, no, leave them. Because I want you to understand the theology of this. Everyone has a place here, including the most insignificant creatures. And not only just a place to fly around, but a place to make their home. See, so there's theology in this as he's looking at that. My King and my God, blessed are those who dwell in your house, ever doing something. Blessed are those who dwell in your house. So he looks at the theology of the swallows and says they're blessed to be here, and we are blessed to be in the same place where God resides. Blessed are those who live in the same place God lives. And while they're dwelling in the house, what do? Ever doing something. What do swallows and sparrows do? Sing. They sing. See, this is the theology in this. You find theology almost everywhere you look, but he looks at this and says, this is awesome. The most insignificant creatures have a reserved place in the residence of God. And not only that, they are so thankful to be there, they spend their time singing. Now, there is great theology here, because for us, we find a home in the residence of God, and while we're there, we sing about who he is. See, we're getting closer to it here. Ever sing your praise? Salah, that's a nice dramatic pause in the music. Take a break there and think about that. We're just like those swallows. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, and whose heart are the highways to Zion. What? By the way, if you're Bible studying and you get to things like this and it doesn't make any sense to you, stop and say to God, what? And just stay there for a while until God uncorks it for you. He said the first one, it makes sense. Blessed are those whose strength is in you. That is, they rely on who you are, God, for the strength in their life, not in themselves. You can do that. You've done it in the past. You've been faithful. That's what I'm going to do. But what is that next line? In whose heart are the highways of Zion? What? There was a song that Petra did many years ago. Remember, Oscar? Yeah. The road to Zion's in your heart. Okay, but what does that mean, really? Remember, the heart is the invisible you, and many times it's not only just the intellect and the emotions, but it's the dreams and the aspirations, where you're going. That's part of the collection of what the heart is. So if you use that for a section, you can actually say, in a sense, in whose aspirations and dreams and goals and directions in your heart, what you dream about, what you daydream about, are the roads to Zion. Now, Zion is just a catchword for Jerusalem itself, and a specific catchword for the place where God dwells. Okay? So he's saying, blessed are those who actually daydream and aspire to take in the road to where God lives. That's what he's saying. So it's like this woman right here. She's sitting at work. She's doing kind of dumb things all day long, but she gets paid for it. That's okay because you make a living doing that. But then she looks up and says, the place where God lives, in my mind, in my heart, in my aspirations, that's really where my heart is on the road to where God is. That's what he says when he says, whose heart are the highways to Zion. That's what they dream about. Now, here we are on Palm Sunday. On Palm Sunday, when this tremendous throng came in with Jesus into Jerusalem, Jerusalem. It was actually a standard yearly event because they're coming in for Passover. And so millions of people over the country. There were 3 celebrations in Israel where you had to go back to Jerusalem from all over the country. And so when people would come and converge on Jerusalem, it was a crazy madhouse of millions of people. But as you walked, because you didn't have cars or airplanes or boats, well, you had boats, but you can't get to Jerusalem by boat. But as you come into Jerusalem and you're walking for many people 2 to 3 days for the extent of Israel, you'd be walking, you'd be singing songs, and as you came close to Jerusalem, your heart would start to flutter. And all the way through, even throughout the entire calendar of the year, your heart and your aspirations would be, you know what? In the spring, we're going to walk to Jerusalem, to the place where God lives. The road to Zion is right here. It's the desires. It's the desires. It's a great picture, just a great picture. And then verse 6, as they go through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. Now we're missing a little bit of culture, so let's fill in a little culture. Baca? You probably don't know what that is because nobody really knows what it is. But here's the speculation. The speculation is the root of the word comes from the same root that means to weep. And it also is used for certain kinds of trees, like mulberry trees and balsam trees. The trees that you basically store and take sap out of for aromatic reasons, right? And so you get this sap. You didn't make maple syrup out of it. You made perfume out of it. Yeah, that's what balsam trees are used for. So when you would store them, they would kind of drip on the outside and they would weep. So this word many times is used for those aromatic trees that would weep once you stored them for the perfume you're going to make out of them. So many people see this Valley of Baca and presume, but we're not sure, but presume this was connected to a time of great sadness, a Valley of Baca, the Valley of Weeping. I mean, the hard times in life, simply. So he says, here's the amazing thing. Those whose hearts are set on the residence of where God lives, on where God's nearness in that sense, they're the ones that go through valleys of weeping, but they're not valleys of weeping anymore. They are transformed. They make it a place of springs. And remember, this is a desert area in Israel. So what he's saying is that they make this dry and arid place like a place that's full of springs because they rely and look forward to the presence of God. That's what he's talking about. And then the last line, the early rain covers it with pools. The early rains in Israel, when in the dry land and it's been arid for a long time, there hasn't been rain. They walk outside, they watch it rain and go, oh, the rains are here, the rains are here. It's a celebration, right? He's saying you can walk through the valley of weeping, and it'll be as though God is bringing unexpected early rains to a dry place. The pictures are just rich, just rich. In fact, this last week when it was raining, I walked outside in front of the house just to watch it. Because it doesn't rain very much here. Where I grew up, it rained all the time. As kids, you hate that. You hate to live in a place where it rains all the time because you can't play outside. But here it rains so seldom, it seems like I stood outside and just watched it. A couple of nights ago, it was raining all through the night. And, I cracked the window, listened to it rain, hitting the roof. Oh. Well, it's worse in Israel. There's less rain there. So when the rains come, the early rains come, it's just a tremendous gift from God. Because where does rain come from? Sort of where God resides in heaven. So it's seen as a tremendous blessing. So he's saying those whose strength is God himself, those who dream about the residence of God and going there, they're the ones that walk through the toughest valleys of life, the valleys of weeping, and for them it's transformed into places of springs and early rains. It's a wonderful place. This is the anticipation of going to the residence of God. This is what it does for them. Great picture. It's the same sentiment as Psalm 30, verse 11. You've turned for me my mourning into dancing. Valley of Baca, weeping, into a place of great blessing. Okay, then they go from strength to strength. Each one appears before God in Zion. They go from strength to strength. This is the only time in the entire Old Testament that phrase is used, strength to strength. And by the way, the word he uses in strength is army. He goes from army to army. No, that's not what it means. But it does mean the strength of an army. So even when you're in the Valley of Baca, in the Valley of Weeping, you go from the might of an army to the might of an army. It's a way of doubling the emphasis of it. And why? Because you're so strong? No, because God himself is the one that we're contemplating, in whose strength I rely. So that's what he's saying. Go from strength to strength, army strength to army strength. Each each one appears before God in Zion. Now that last line is really astonishing, because remember the line that says that if you ever appear to God face to face, you'll die? Well, why doesn't that last line mean you're going to die? You mean I'm going to appear before God? That's like when someone says, I'm going to court this week, I'm going to appear before the judge. Right? That's what you should think when you think about God. Except in his particular case and in ours, our guilt has been taken care of, and now we get to actually be face to face with God. And we're going to appear before him. And that's the anticipation of the roads to Zion. I'm going to a place where God lives, and I'm going to appear before him. It's really a warm statement of astonishing intimacy with the God who created and judged. There's no fear in that last line. It's all anticipation and excitement, right? Each one appears before God in Zion. So, O Lord, this is the center of the psalm. O Lord, God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. And by the way, again, I wanted to point out this interesting sequence of names of God in the beginning, because it makes some people's heads explode. O Lord, God of hosts, O Yehovah, Jehovah, Elohim, God of Sabaoth. And all the time in the Old Testament, again in English translations, if you see Lord God, you're actually reading Jehovah Elohim, Jehovah Elohim, Jehovah Elohim. Some people have a false doctrine about who Jehovah and Elohim is. They're just different words for the same God, emphasizing different characteristics. Jehovah, the covenant keeper with God, with Israel. Elohim, the one whose power, it's El, it's the power, it's the two-letter El word. With the Him, the plural ending that makes him not only powerful, but like the power of 10 men, but more. The Him always makes the plural, makes it more powerful. So he says, here's the covenant-keeping God, Jehovah. Elohim, the one who's most powerful in the plural, and who is in charge of the peoples. So he's in charge of everybody. He's higher than everybody. So that's what he's saying. Don't miss it. That's powerful. O God, O Lord God of hosts, hear my, O Jehovah Elohim of the Sabaoth of the hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Selah. So that's his dramatic pause again. This is the center of the psalm. And then he continues on. Behold our shield, O God. Look on the face of your anointed. Behold our shield. God himself is the shield. And he'll say that in just a second. He's saying, as he basically stands in the residence of God, he's saying to all those around him, behold our shield. God himself. God. And he uses the word for, okay, here's your guess. I'm not going to tell you until you guess. Which word for God do you think he uses right here? Jehovah, the covenant-keeping, or Elohim, the powerful one? Elohim. Why? Because that's the power. It makes more sense in the context of the sentence. It's the powerful one. So, behold our shield, the most powerful plural one. Elohim. That's the way he uses that. That makes sense. And then he says, look on the face of your anointed. There's a lot of debate about what this line means. Anointed again, well, let me just tell you, this word anointed is one that we're very familiar with. In the Old Testament, it's Mashiach. Or in English transliteration, Messiah. So is he saying, look on the Messiah? Look on the face of your Messiah? Probably not, but maybe. We're not going to rule it out totally in that sense. But you have to remember, too, that the word Mashiach is used most frequently in the Old Testament for people who've just been chosen by God. People who God looked ahead in the history of time and said, they're mine, they're mine, they're mine, they're mine. He's actually put his hand on them and said, they're mine. In a real sense, it's I'm using New Testament words, the chosen, the elect, the ones that God has already said, you're mine already from the beginning of time. Now, with the Messiah Jesus, that was also the case. But it's not until you get to Daniel where the word's used principally to mean the one chosen one. Then you understand it's the Messiah. But here, what he's really talking about, look on the face of your anointed, most probably means the chosen ones of Israel and the chosen ones who follow Jesus as an extension of the Messiah. So really, he's saying as he comes to the residence of God, look on the face of those whom you have chosen to be in your home. That's what he's saying. Now, before we get too far, I want to tell you that includes us. Paul, when he comes to this idea in the New Testament, always uses the word elect, the elect, as though somehow before even the universe was made, God wanted you in it. He wanted you in his plan for him. He wanted you in his house, in his residence, in that sense elect. How is that possible? Well, this is where we start to fall apart intellectually. God's a to see anything he wants. But when he sees us throughout all eternity as someone who he's always chosen and elected, and we're his. So as we come to Jerusalem, as we come to the residence of God, he's saying, I'm going to be there with God himself, and he's asked God to look on the face of the ones whom he's always had his hand on. It's a very intimate kind of idea. It's a way of coming into Jerusalem and saying, I'm not coming as a foreigner invading Jerusalem. I'm coming here as one of yours. I'm one of yours. Elect. Okay, that's what he's saying. And he is our shield. He goes on. So let's take a look at the home. He's going to finally wrap this up. What is a home? He says, verse 10, one day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. We sang this morning. Now we're going to sing it again. It's this way in this hyperbole of it, saying, you know what, God, the place where you live is so awesome. I'd rather be here one day than 1,000 anywhere else. That's how much his soul longs for the residence of God, where God is. And then he uses another contrast. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. And now we got to start to understand what the residence of God is. If the residence of God is one thing, but the opposite is wickedness, then the residence of God is lovely because God, the good, is there, as opposed to being in the other residences of the wicked, where there's evil and wickedness. That's his contrast. Now, there is actually an attraction to living in the houses of the wicked. We looked at this in Psalm 73. In Psalm 73, he starts it off by saying, oh God, my feet almost slipped. I almost started envying the wicked because they seem like they have everything. They never have any problems. They have all the money. This is just not fair. I was envying the wicked. Of course, when he finishes 73, he says, it's a good thing I didn't go down that path because the wicked have an end that we see from God. So he was very clear about that. So there is a temptation to be in the tents of wickedness because it seems like they've got everything. And what the writer of the psalm is saying, they don't. I would rather, and he uses a diminutive idea, I'd rather be the doorkeeper at the house of God. I'm not even in his house. I'm just kind of on the outside. I'd just rather be kind of close. In fact, there's an interesting interpretation of this. It may not be doorkeeper. The only place you see doorkeepers is at fancy hotels in New York City. Those guys with the funny outfits. We don't have a doorkeeper here, do we? I don't think so. And we're not sure they had doorkeepers at the temple area either, although we know there were people who controlled access so Gentiles couldn't get in, all that kind of stuff. But when you go into the New Testament, you know who's always hanging around the doors of the temple? Beggars. So it could very well mean that what he's saying, because that's where the beggars would find the best action to get donations. People were already coming to bring their donation to the temple. He might actually be saying, I think I would rather be a crippled beggar on the outskirts of the house of God. A nothing there on the edges of his house than to be fully in the tents of the wicked who have everything. See the contrast? He's right, because it's not the structure that makes the appeal, it's God himself. So is a home this? Well, I'd like to make that my home. And as attractive as that is, at least to me, I think that's a man kind of cabin instead of a woman kind of cabin. I think a woman, I think so. So anyway, but still, it has nothing to do with the structure. And unfortunately, in a materialist world that we're so infused in, when we think about how lovely is your dwelling place, we're thinking about the stones and the gold and the material thing. And he's trying to tell us the whole psalm has nothing to do with that. He hasn't talked about the structure of the building at all yet. And by the way, when you read about the requirements for what the temple was supposed to be made out of, the gold and the carvings and stuff, it was way cool. So I would expect him to start off Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord? You have gold overlaid on everything in here. You have these beautiful carvings of things. I mean, this is just the most incredible thing. And the 20-foot ceilings, the whole 9 yards. This is incredible. Wow, look at this. But how lovely is your dwelling place? But it doesn't do that. How lovely is your dwelling place because you were here, is what he's getting at. And it has nothing to do with the cabin in the right location. It has to do with the resident that's there. And I'm joining him in residence like the swallows, the ones who are insignificant. For the Lord God, there's Jehovah, Elohim. The Lord God is a sun and a shield. This phrase, the sun and shield, I think is only used one other place in the Old Testament. It's kind of odd, but it's a very common phrase that pagan cultures use for their God. He's a sun. He's a shield. So not only is he the source of life and light, but he's also my ultimate protector from everyone else. So he's saying this is why I love this God and where he lives, because he's my sun. He's my shield. It's all about who God is and nothing about the structure he lives in. And then this great God bestows favor and honor. Now, if they had the word grace in the Old Testament, this is where they put it. But you don't use it very much. But that's exactly what grace means. Favor and honor. Is it something you earn, favor and honor? No. It's something that he grants. Who grants it? The Lord Jehovah, who's in charge of the Sabbath, of everyone. He grants favor and he grants honor to the swallows that build their nest in his building. That's us. We're those swallows in that sense. And yet, this great king, this great one whose residence we daydream about, his presence we daydream about, he's the one who grants favor and honor to us. How can that be? How can that be? That's why when the writer of Amazing Grace wrote it, they were really good words. This grace really is amazing, that we haven't deserved it. And yet when I come into his presence, in his residence, he grants to me favor and honor. It's astonishing. This is probably classically the most New Testament idea in the Old Testament. And I have to qualify that because the New Testament and the Old say the same things. But if you read this phrase and someone asked you in a quiz, is this from the Old Testament or New? You'd probably guess New. Because grace is so prominent in the New Testament. But grace is super prominent in the Old. And here's one example right here. We don't deserve it, but he grants us favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. Now, before you get trapped, this doesn't mean if you live a perfectly righteous life, he'll give you all good things. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is he gives good to those, good he does not withhold to those who walk uprightly. Those who walk uprightly are the ones who've said in their hearts, I'm not going to commit myself to the tools of wickedness to get what I need. I'm going to instead trust in God himself. That's what he's saying. And does God say, well, I don't know. I think once you get a little bit better, if next week you're not cursing your neighbor out for cheating and stuff like that, I think, man, let's give it a few weeks and give it a few weeks every month. Let you actually grow up and be a little less wicked in your heart. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll go ahead and give you a good thing. That's totally unqualified, really. Those who trust in God, those who put their trust in him instead of trusting in their own wickedness, does he withhold anything? And the answer is no. No. This is a really powerful thing to remember when you're in the midst of the valley of Baca, the valley of weeping. You say, is God going to help me right here? Well, one of the arguments that comes out of the New Testament is, listen, if God sacrificed his son on your behalf, well, what is he going to withhold from you now? Anything? He's already given the ultimate. Well, the answer is no, nothing. And where does that idea come from? Right here. God, the place where God resides, where I reside with him, he withholds nothing that's good. Now we have to define what good is. For me, good is a very large motorcycle. Or that little cabin on that Norwegian lake with the hawks flying around. Right? Something like that. And then we have such twisted ideas of what's good for us, or finding the right person to spend your life with. That's my ultimate good. And there's good in that. There's good in all these things, but that's not the good he's talking about. What is the good of this? What is what is the good thing he's not going to withhold? Himself. God himself is our greatest good. And throughout the entire walk of our lives, he's trying to teach us the fact that all the other things that we place our heart on, while they're not wicked or evil, they still are second place compared to him. That's why his heart is so excited to go where God lives. Because God himself. We saw this in the Psalm, was it last week or week before? The nearness of God is my good. So that's why this is wonderful. Will God withhold who he is? That's good from us? No. Because we have a God really well defined in the Old and New Testaments who is just crazy about you as his creation and wants to establish a relationship with you, and he wants to totally flood you with delight about who he is. That's the message of the Old and New Testaments. That's what he wants. So will he withhold himself from you? No. He will wants to just explode in your life and let you know everything about him. He's the God that can and will be known. By the way, there's a misconception that goes around outside of Christianity that God is incomprehensible. And many people who look in from the outside of Christianity say, well, you say, you Christians, that God is incomprehensible. We've heard you say it. God's incomprehensible. You know where they've heard Christianity say it? They've heard it say it in one of the creeds that are actually quite old, all right? And in that creed it said that, yes, God is incomprehensible. But they're using the real word for incomprehensible. Not just you can sort of get who God is. Comprehensible means you can get your arms totally around him and master the knowledge. That's comprehend, is to literally, in the roots of the word, it means to be able to say, I know everything about this, I comprehend it. Like I can comprehend that 2 and 2 equals 4. I've got that one. Totally. I comprehend 2 plus 2 equals 4. I don't fully comprehend calculus. Even though I had to use it almost every day on my job where I used to work, I don't totally comprehend, but I get a lot of it. The idea that God is incomprehensible means that you will never get to the end of fully knowing God. You'll never completely get your arms around it. So in that sense, in that creed, yes, God is incomprehensible. But is he knowable? Oh, famously so. Famously so. And so, yes, he is knowable, but you'll never get to the end of being delighted about what you discover about who God is. That's what incomprehensible means. So just in case someone hits you with that someday, that's what that's all about. So he doesn't withhold himself from us. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the one who trusts in you. And this is his closing line. Now, this is, I thought this was an odd closing line, actually. Because generically, it's pretty nice. O Lord of hosts, there we go, you Jehovah of the Savah, the one who's in charge of everybody. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the one, that's us, who trusts in you. But we haven't been talking about trust up to this point, really. Not really. But this becomes more clear. Let me do this for you. Can you handle one more last word thing? Because this really breaks this verse apart. The word trust right there is principally, there's 2 principal Hebrew words that are used for trust in the Old Testament. We have chasa and we have atach, okay? So these are the 2 words. The one that's on your left is literally comes from the word to flee. So when you flee an enemy and they're behind you, and you flee to God and you get to him and he's your refuge. He protects you from that. So it literally means to flee. That's to put your trust in him. Don't run to something that can't protect you. Run to something that can, and that's God himself. So that's the idea. That's the trust there, which means to flee to God. The word on the right, though, again, used for trust, this batach word, it really is the result of trust. It's what you experience when you feel secure, when you have a confidence, when a confident hope, when you're unconcerned about. It's basically what happens is that once you run to him in trust and you find your refuge in him, then you can have a confident hope and have an assurance that he's got this. Okay? That's that trust word right there. It's the result of trusting. It's this sense of security because of the character and power of the one you run to refuge for. So the word on the left is really the action to run to him and to flee to him in refuge. The one on the right is the one that tells you the result in your heart in terms of peace and rest and solid confidence and hope in who he is. Now, knowing that those are the 2 words, you're going to be the writer of the psalm now. Which psalm, in this last verse of the psalm, which word would you use to cap off what it means to be in his home? See a lot of spit flying in the mouth. Well, it's not the left one because we've already gone to him. What it is the right one. What a blessing it is to the one who has settled his confident hope and his expectations in the power and security of God himself. Now, isn't that a great blessing? It is. But it presumes upon the fact that we've actually run to him already. And that's true for Israel, and that's true for us. This is the home word right here. This is the home word. So when I ask you, where is home to you? Where is the place where you can settle in peaceful rest, confident in the hope of your circumstance and situation, not only confident in your hope, but feeling secure and completely unconcerned? That's what home is. And that home is in God. That's what makes home. That's why as Israelites came into Jerusalem, they saw that dwelling place. It's not about the building, although the building was impressive. It's the fact that we have a God who's so mighty and strong, so loving toward us, that I can rest in peace, in confident hope and expectation of who he is. That's hope. That's what hope is right there. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the one who attacks in you, who feels secure in you, who is unconcerned about everything else because of you, who is indeed your confident hope. Now, also, the last two words are telling, too. In you. It's not in his building. It's not in his temple or his residence or anything like that. It's in him. So in a real sense, home is not a place, it's a person. I have batach in him as I'm in him. Now, that's a very common idea through the Old Testament. It echoes into the New Testament when the apostles are talking about it. When Paul, the studied intellectual who understood the Old Testament, saw that, he decided also to do a slight play on words and turn this upside down. And say basically, blessed is the one who has confident hope and expectation because he's in you. Not only are we in him, but he's in you. Now, if you say, wait a second, you can't do that preposition both. We can't both be in him and have him be in us. Now, if you think that's true, you got to read what Jesus prayed for us in John 17, because he says exactly that. He says exactly that. I and you and me. Wow, how does that work? We're in the same place together. We're in the same residence together. In that sense, since we're in him, he's also in us. And that creates in our heart a sense of settled security and confident hope and expectation. And that is home. Home is in him. And then to make it even crazier, in case Paul says, if you didn't catch what I was saying, he says, you know that temple you look at in Jerusalem? Well, you know what the temple is now, he says? If he is in you, you're that temple. You mean I'm the dwelling place of God? Yes. And he dwells in me, and I dwell in him. And we have confident hope and expectation and security in the one who is Jehovah Elohim, in charge of all that's all this. So this is his closing line. The Lord of hosts, blessed is the one who basically lives in you. And that's what he's talking about. And in living in him, we have life. This is such a New Testament idea. The guys who wrote the New Testament weren't creating new ideas. They were just extending what had always been known and said and sung about in the Old Testament. And that's it right here. The one who bestows favor on us, the one who shows honor to us when we don't deserve it. We see ourselves as kind of swallows that fly through the creation of God, and somewhere we find the opportune time to make a little nest in the cracks of his building. And yet, God delights in hearing us sing in his residence. How lovely is your dwelling place, because you're here, and I'm in you, and you're in me. Psalm 84. Awesome. We're going to sing this last song because I want you to look at the words right here in this first verse. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. For my soul longs, that's the invisible part, my soul longs, even faints. I mean, we run out of gas. We're so excited that we wait for you. For here my heart is satisfied. And here we have the batach part. Here my heart is satisfied within your presence. And what do? I sing. This is Psalm 84 in brand new music. So let's finish with this and delight in the fact that you don't have to go to Jerusalem anymore to be where he is. He's in you. He's in you. Okay. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this beautiful song. Beautiful song. And Lord, you delight our hearts in allowing us like birds to just flutter around and making nests in the corners of your kingdom. And it's our delight to sing your praise and to sing our heart's delight in you. How lovely is your dwelling place. How lovely is your dwelling place. And Lord, we thank you that you're not a God who makes everything in this universe and then goes off to the corner of it. And in that corner of the universe, you say, well, I hope things work out well. Hope we get along with each other. But you are the God who's near, who, like Israel, decided in our wanderings in the wilderness to plant yourself in the midst of us. You're the God in Jerusalem who planted himself in the midst of them. Where King David looked at your presence there and said, you know what, we don't need to carry around a tent anymore. God's living here forever. And so you are the God who delights in living in our midst. And you're the God who delights in being discovered by us for that reason. How lovely is your dwelling place. And now, our hearts are astonished. You've chosen to live in us. Thank you for your great love. Thank you for showing us honor and favor when we never deserved it. Thank you for the greatness of your grace given to us when we least expected it.